We're so glad you've joined us on the ERLC podcast to explore how the Bible addresses important cultural issues pertaining to life, religious liberty, marriage and family, and human dignity, and how we can walk in wisdom for God's glory and for the flourishing of our neighbors. If you're enjoying this podcast and find it helpful, please leave a review wherever you listen. This will help more people find and benefit from what we're learning together. We are grateful for the time you take to join us for these conversations.
As injustices and inequalities have been exposed, there have been increasing calls to correct the criminal justice system and our prisons. What might Christians have to say to minister to those in prison? What's our calling toward and for the incarcerated? At Evangelicals for Life, Stephen Harris moderated a panel with Thabiti Anyabwile, Heather Rice-Minus, and Julie Warren on these very issues. Let's join their conversation now.
My name is Stephen Harris. I serve as a policy director with ERLC, working out of the Washington, D.C. office. Sitting immediately to my left is Heather Rice-Minus. Heather serves as Vice President of Government Affairs at Prison Fellowship, which is the nation's largest Christian nonprofit serving prisoners, former prisoners, and their families. Next to Heather, Julie Warren. Julie serves as the State Director for Tennessee and Kentucky with Right on Crime, which is a national campaign of the Texas Public Policy Foundation in partnership with the American Conservative Union Foundation and Prison Fellowship. And next to Julie is Thabiti Anyabwile. Thabiti Anyabwile is writer, speaker, but also pastor at Anacostia River Church in Southeast DC. He's also my pastor, and so I want to make sure that everything I do up here is biblical as we're having this conversation. But to kick us off, I think an important first question to have on this issue in this space, and I want to hear from each of you all. You can answer in turn. Just thinking about criminal justice reform, we've been talking all day about a pro-life ethic and what a pro-life ethic in the 21st century looks like. What kinds of issues intersect with the pro-life ethic, and thinking about criminal justice reform particularly, just want to hear how you all, as Christians, have seen the kind of theological foundations of criminal justice reform speak to and be relevant to a pro-life discourse. You know, why is this an important issue for Christians to be concerned about, who are also concerned about the life issue as we've known it historically?
I would say, Stephen, working at Prison Fellowship, we stress so much how in the justice system, when a crime happens, it's not just a crime against the state, but it's actually a crime against the person. And harm has been done to a victim and also to a community oftentimes. And if we look at the Bible, it's always calling for a restorative approach to that. And that's so rooted in believing that every person involved has human dignity and value. And so the same application of human dignity that we apply to the pro-life issue and believing and advocating for those who are on board and their dignity and value should be applied in so many facets of our political space, including the criminal justice system. And we as a nation are known as the world's greatest incarcerator. And we should be concerned about those who are in prison, those who are accused, and we should want to make sure that our justice system is reflecting human dignity in that space, both for those who are there in prison and for those who have been harmed by crime.
I mean, if you're a Christian, one of the basic tenets is that life is inspired and breathed by God. Mm-hmm. And we as humans have no latitude to assign a different value to human life, whether it's an unborn or whether it's an individual who is sitting in prison. We just don't have the right to do that. I come from the prosecutor world. I cut my teeth at the Department of Justice and then was a prosecutor. And it's easy to get angry and it's easy to get disillusioned. But the second you stop seeing that person, that defendant, as a human being, is you are losing your ability to be effective. If you take the value away from a defendant or an offender, you can't then expect them to rehabilitate. That's an unreasonable expectation, and I think sometimes our criminal justice system has become hardened to the human dignity element of it, and you lose your ability to be effective.
Yeah. When God the Father sends his Son into the world to die for sinners, for people broken in sin, and raises him from the grave 3 days later for their justification, the gospel then becomes this declaration that we cannot throw away life. God's not throwing away life. God is redeeming life. God is restoring. God is renewing us in the image of himself through Christ. And so the entire motion of Christian living ought to be redemptive. It ought to be sort of swinging toward the reclamation of life and the flourishing of life and the sense of grace's power to redeem what's been broken or marred or hurt or injured. And so it just involves us in a life ethic from start to finish, whether we think of it in terms of the image of God or think of it in terms of a restorative justice or think of it in terms of the gospel itself. We're life people. And so that's what we ought to be about in sort of every issue.
Yeah, no, that's good. Heather, I want to bring it back to you. Many in here might be conversant with this issue at the public policy level. Many in here may be new to this issue. Last month, a bill, see, it brought a smile to her face. A bill called the First Step Act was signed into law. Many of you might have heard of it. It's a rather historic piece of legislation. One commentator called it a Christmas miracle. Review for us the highlights of what the First Step Act is. Just give us a sense of the weight of what just happened and what this bill does.
Right. The First Step Act does bring a smile to my face, and I've been calling it a Christmas miracle too. And I've had the pleasure of working with Stephen and so many other faith leaders and groups like Right on Crime on the Hill to push this forward for literally over 5 years. And we've been working on different iterations of this bill. But the First Step Act, as it was finally passed right before Christmas break, is focusing on the federal prison system. And there's about 180,000 men and women in our federal prisons today. And it tries to make sure that they're getting sufficient programming. We know from the Bureau of Prisons that there are 16,000 people who are incarcerated that are on a waiting list for basic literacy classes. So we know that there's a demand for that. Organizations like ours, Prison Fellowship, that provide programming want to do more there, but sometimes it can be difficult to partner and provide programming. And so this would increase the amount of partnerships with organizations like ours and also provide some funding for some other programs to exist in the Federal Bureau of Prisons so that we're preparing people. Also, people would have the opportunity to earn credits for completing programs and helping motivate people to get in the programming that they need so that they're ready to go home. And so people will be able to get increased phone call time or increased family time, things that we know as believers are so important for strengthening families, but also for public safety. We know that those things are actually critical to reducing the likelihood that someone will commit a new crime when they're released. And then those who are testing as low risk will also get the opportunity to move to pre-release custody and home confinement or a halfway house earlier than they would have otherwise for completing those programs. And then there's also some really critical sentencing amendments that will allow for more proportional sentences for people charged particularly with drug crimes in the federal system. In the federal system, we've seen just really excessive sentences and enhancements for sentences when it comes to drug crimes. And so those are some of the really core components of the First Step Act. And we were delighted and have had a lot of prayers going to see this happen and work with so many people who are personally impacted or have family members who are incarcerated. And it really was a Christmas miracle.
Yeah. You Google First Step Act, you will be educated very quickly. Just a lot of stuff on that amazing piece of legislation that is now law. Julie, I want to bring it to you. You know, when this conversation takes place, particularly in the public policy space, it's subject, like many things in our day, to just a high politicization. And that conversation usually features along kind of two polarities: those who are either soft on crime and those who want to be tough on crime. And what camp are you in? What do you think about that framing, and why is that the way that it's been framed, and what's a more helpful way to to enter into that discourse?
Well, I think we see those types of labels in a lot of our political discourse on a lot of different issues. You know, if we slap a label on it that has negative connotations on it, we can maybe avoid a sensitive conversation because we've sort of created a stigma. The idea of soft on crime is that I just write it off as you're trying to avoid a substantive conversation on the issue because it's not true. And the idea of tough on crime, in my opinion, being tough on crime is creating less crime. Actually reducing recidivism, addressing criminogenic behavior, and targeting, having targeted sentences and sanctions such that they work in that offender's favor so they don't offend anymore. That's being tough on crime because you're going to see less crime. Being tough on a criminal, which is what I think a lot of people have sort of used as being tough on crime, doesn't always get you there. Now, there's going to be those offenders that commit heinous crimes that you might have to really put that person away for a long time, but most of the time we know 95% of the folks are going to be released, which is why the First Step Act was so important. However, being tough on that criminal, if you don't have an end game, okay, so you really threw the hammer down on that guy, but to what end? You can't just warehouse this individual for an incredibly long period of time without any plan, failure to plan, and expect a good outcome. And you feel tough on crime because you were tough on a criminal, but you didn't actually do anything to reduce crime. And in Tennessee, we've done a lot of good things, and a lot of good things are coming. We're in a really good place, but we're one of the highest incarcerators, and we have one of the highest violent crime rates in the country. And we think we're tough on crime, and I think we've thought that about ourselves for a long time, but because we were tough on the criminal, but we weren't getting any outcomes because we didn't have an end game. So this whole idea of soft on crime versus tough on crime, I really think is sort of it's not really the actual conversation that we need to have.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thabiti, I think, when I'm having this conversation with some people who are just beginning to think about criminal justice, an individual may say, crime is committed and, they have to catch the one who did it, and they catch the one who did it and they punish that person for the crime they did. Boom, that's justice. That's the conversation. For the Christian who wants to think well about criminal justice, prison ministry, all these kind of issues, what is the fuller picture that the Christian ought to be concerned about than just, criminal, crime, punished, boom, we did it?
Well, I think if the Christian is thinking about this, first of all, I want to encourage them to look at the Old Testament prophets, look at Proverbs as a whole body of literature, the New Testament as well, recognize that the pursuit of justice is actually part of our active worship of God. So we're not talking in partisan political terms here. We're talking about as those who bear witness to the character of God and the work of God in the world. How we pursue justice is part and parcel of our discipleship. It's part and parcel of our worship of God. For that to be true, we then need to root this in the book. And so our notions of justice, I think, ought to be as well-rounded as the notions we find in the Bible. So that means then we've got to add to punitive justice, retribution, some other categories like restoration. So justice requires us to not only deal with the person who's been caught in some infraction, but it calls us to deal with the victim and making the victim whole. It also requires us then biblically to think about procedural justice, the matters of process, and whether or not those things are right. And you think in the Bible, the metaphor of just scales and just weights, for example. That's a procedural justice kind of issue. And so we want to come to the book and recognize that the book has more passages that are relevant to this than just Romans 13 and the state using the sword. It has a lot of other things that go into justice that have to do with how we make a whole community, an entire community, whole. Not just punish the perpetrator, but restore the victim, to reconcile the relationship, if we can, between perpetrator and victim, where that's appropriate, and really set a standard for human flourishing instead of merely punishing a criminal. I like that distinction, rather than being tough on actual crime itself and reducing crime.
That's helpful. Heather, we often see each other in the advocacy space on the Hill at meetings, government affairs for Prison Fellowship. Prison Fellowship, a much larger ministry. Just give us, of those of us who are not familiar with the ministry itself, the organization, a larger snapshot of the work that you all do and perhaps ways in which they can partner with Prison Fellowship and just be aware of some of the initiatives that are going on with your work.
Yeah, so starting with what we're already talking about, we're informed by our work as a prison ministry to advocate for justice. One place I think would be a good source for you to look at is a project we worked on in partnership with the ERLC and others. If you go to www.justicedeclaration.org, you can see a statement that lays out some of the very conversations we're having, and you can sign there, and that will keep you in touch with us about other opportunities to advocate in the states or at the federal level. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. We also train people who are interested to even take the next level, not just be on our email list, but we call them justice ambassadors. We train them to meet with their legislators and build relationships there, host events in their communities and talk about these issues. So that's another opportunity. But Prison Fellowship is really known first and foremost as a prison ministry. We have programming across the country in hundreds of prisons. And our primary program, most intensive program, is called the Academy. And the Academy puts people through, it's a voluntary program. Anyone of any faith is invited to join us, but we teach from a Christian worldview, and we try and address some of the underlying issues of why someone's committed a crime and address criminogenic needs. And we do that from a Christian worldview. And there's 500 hours of curriculum that go into that before someone graduates. And there's just such amazing stories of transformation that have come out of the Academy, and we're just growing and growing in the majority of the states. We have an Academy in the majority of the states now across the country, and because of the First Step Act, we're hopeful to have even more in some of the federal facilities. Another thing we do is we try and come alongside families of the incarcerated, and one of our key programs for that is Angel Tree. There's a variety of Angel Tree programs throughout the year. One of our keynote ones, though, is during Christmas. We provide gifts on behalf of incarcerated moms and dads who sign up their kids to get a gift from them, and we partner with churches to go deliver those gifts on behalf of that parent with a note from their parent. So Angel Tree is a great program to look into if your church is not already involved. And then another thing I'll mention that I think is one of our best kept secrets at Prison Fellowship is the Wardens Exchange Program, where we've actually for the last 5 years been involved in bringing in cohorts of wardens of prisons to talk about what does moral rehabilitation, what should that look like in your prison? And we invite cohorts of wardens from all over the country to participate, and they share ideas across jurisdictions. We share some of our best practices that we've learned, and that's been a great opportunity to really try and bring in restoration inside the walls to the people who are doing it every day. So those are some of our key programs.
Oh, that's great. As we think about connecting people in the pews to the work of organizations like Prison Fellowship and just being cognizant of things that different organizations are doing, Thabiti, I'm sure there are many prison ministries that are represented here, but just for individuals who are thinking about perhaps getting into this work from the site of the local church in terms of ministry to people who are incarcerated, any words of advice, warnings, just tips on where do I start? How do we begin thinking about, okay, we want to minister to those who are in prison?
Amen. Praise God for folks who have that desire. I only want to encourage that. I think one first thing to do is just to talk with the leadership of your church. Let them know that desire. Let them know that burden. Allow your pastors or perhaps deacons in the church to kind of shepherd that desire with you. Give you sort of the resources that are in your particular church and connect you with some opportunities in your particular neighborhood. Yeah. The other thing I would say is I think I did this several Sundays back, just asked how many folks had relatives that were incarcerated or involved with the system in some way, and most hands in the church go up, right? So another thing you do, you don't think of it necessarily as prison ministry, but just befriending the people who are affected by incarceration and the criminal justice system in your church as brothers, sisters in the Lord is significant support. And part of what you can do there is then to be ready along with them to help the person who's returning to the community get on their feet, have a different community, have an alternative set of relationships to get plugged into on a sort of daily, week-to-week basis. That's really important ministry as well. And then you can move out toward programmatic things, whether it's, a Bible study in a prison or some of the things that Prison Fellowship does and other organizations do. You can move out towards some of those more organized program level ministries. But I think there's a lot to be done just by being a good brother or sister in the church with people who are affected by this issue.
No, that's good. That's good. I told somebody one time when I was in pastoral ministry, one of the best congregations I've ever had when I preached a sermon was in prison. I mean, locked in. And nobody going up and getting to the bathroom, just everybody there taking notes. I was like, I just want to camp out here. They make me feel like I'm a good preacher. Julie, want to hear more about Right on Crime, and I know you look at things particular to at things at the state level, Tennessee and Kentucky. We'd love to hear about some reforms you've seen there, but just educate us on the broader work of Right on Crime and particular reforms you've seen in the states where you work.
Right. Well, Right on Crime is a project of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And a lot of these reforms that we saw in the state, are seeing in the state level, really kind of started in 2007 with Texas when they were faced with an option of building $2 billion worth of new prison facilities to handle their overpopulation issue, or actually solve the problem. So they reinvested $241 million into diversion programs, into parole programs for nonviolent. Started thinking about nonviolent versus violent offenders. Should we be treating them the same? No, we probably shouldn't. And it's been very effective. Their crime rate's gone down about 31%. Their recidivism rate's gone down in double digits. They've closed 8 prisons, and so these great results have sort of been duplicated in other states, and Right on Crime has put state directors and sort of gotten involved in other states outside of Texas. They created this national campaign. The work of the states has been really what I think helped spur on the First Step Act, because a lot of the programs the First Step Act incorporate have been successfully implemented in the states. So I think that there were a lot of states that were really good role models for the federal government. So that's what Right on Crime does. We do lobby at the federal level, but most of the work that we do are in the states, addressing the needs that those individual states have. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to rethinking how you look at that offender. Yeah. And it really does kind of boil down to that. There might be different, technicalities and different evidence-based programs for this state over that state, but really what we all need to do is rethink how we look at that criminal. And once you can kind of get lawmakers to start rethinking how they look at that individual, and then the object becomes making sure that person is successful when they reenter, as opposed to just continuing to hammer them so we look really tough on crime. You can really get a lot of really good things done. And we're seeing a lot of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle really recalibrating. And it's just, and you've seen it too, it's so encouraging. And it's bipartisan, and that's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to be a part of. I'm just so honored, to be honest.
Yeah, a follow-up question to that, and I know you've written about this, just seeing the different areas of this issue that people are beginning to speak about and to do work on. Bail reform. And I remember kind of reading up on this and knowing people who were personally just kind of going through the system and dealing with bail. That's a conversation that's picking up. And again, I know you've written on this. Just help us, why would bail, something like bail that seems pretty straightforward, why is that a question of reform and concern these days?
Well, I'm going to take Tennessee as the first, as a sort of the test case. Well over 50% of our jail population are just there on pretrial detention, which means bail was imposed, they couldn't make it. So a lot of them are low bails. They just couldn't pay that $2,000 bail. So they sit in jail for months, maybe a year, and it's incredibly expensive. So you can talk from a fiscal standpoint, but you have to ask yourself, why is that person there? Because they couldn't pay. Not because they're a risk to society, but because they just couldn't pay. So our jails, and Tennessee is really no different than a lot of states, are just debtors' prisons. And you have individuals who are there simply because they don't have the economic means. That is cruel. It doesn't service justice at all. It's incredibly expensive to the taxpayer, but that's a secondary issue. But it also is detrimental to public safety because, we had a hockey player who, beat up his girlfriend, and he had $50,000 to make bail that night. Tell me, is he a safety risk? I mean, we have to rethink about, are we warehousing someone because they couldn't come up with money? That's so fundamentally wrong. Whereas we should look at who's a risk. So I think that that's going to be a really big transition to transition from bail and means to a risk-based pretrial release. But that's something that we're going to be exploring in Tennessee. Kentucky's done a lot more. They're decades ahead of a lot of other places, but a lot of states are really starting to do a lot of work on that. But I think it's one of the most important areas of reform that we need to be focusing on.
Well, certainly. I remember reading that the length of time people are sitting there, some of them are then losing their jobs. And it's the effects of that, the implications of that.
There's so many and we also see people pleading to things because they want to get out. So they might have a Class E felony charge, and the prosecutor will come in and be like, "Hey, look, I can give you a misdemeanor if you plead guilty today, and we'll let you out tomorrow morning," and they take it. And so, I mean, we really want to make sure that if you're taking someone's freedom away, that you can really justify why you're doing it. And if someone is put in jail simply because they didn't have $1,000, we should all take some pause.
I want everybody to kind of weigh in on this if you have thoughts to add, but this conversation usually closely comes into proximity with the conversation about race that's attempted to be had here in this country. Want to just get thoughts on how this issue touches on the issue of race and how that conversation is being had, has been had. Just make us aware of how those two things converge. Yeah.
I would say, Stephen, if you look at the statistics of our criminal justice system, you will see such disparate impact on people of color at all stages of the system. We know, for example, that people of color are using and dealing drugs at roughly the same rates as people who are white, but they are getting arrested, incarcerated, and much harsher sentences than their counterparts. And so, there's just no argument to be had that we have some sort of problem. I think the conversation that needs to continue and is a complex one is, why is that happening? And I think people kind of tend to run to two camps of either racial bias or upstream issues, things like poverty. And I think it's really a mix of those complex factors. I would say without hesitation that racial bias is a factor in why we have these disparate impacts in the justice system. At the same time, I think that the criminal justice system and changing the law and policy can only have so much effect on correcting that. And we also have to look at these other complex factors to be able to correct some of those racial disparities. And I think, while we can use the law in those areas, and we should whenever that's possible, we need the truth of the gospel. And we need to take some time to reflect on that, each of us, to look at our own racial bias and have that be what propels us towards reflection on ourselves and asking God for guidance and leading to greater unity both in the church and in our communities, and leading and advancing justice. Yeah.
I think, again, it just boils down to the human dignity of it. You have to look at every single individual, if you're a judge, if you're a prosecutor, as a human being, and you have to want them to succeed. Yeah. You can't just have to want to punish them. And you have to be colorblind, and you have to be objective, and it takes a lot of discipline to be objective sometimes if you've been in law enforcement for a long time. But I mean, every single human being that comes in front of you has to be a human being with value and dignity, and you have to want them to succeed. That should be a core tenet of someone in law enforcement. And I think that we just need to get back there. And I think, like what you said, we could pass a lot of laws, and I'm still for that. That's what I do for a living. I try to lobby for changes in policy, but it's really fundamentally an internal dialogue that we have to have with ourselves.
I said in the green room, I was just going to follow these ladies around and just say amen to everything they said. And this is a good place to just say amen. Yeah. I agree with all that's said there. One of the things that's interesting to me is that there are some folks, so if I'm thinking about how folks respond, there are folks who go, it's only race and all about race. And there are folks who go, race ain't even a thing, right? And so they just divide up into those two camps and never the twain shall meet. And I do think there's something important about holding together what my two sisters have said up here together. There is something that's very important about recognizing that fundamentally, every person you meet is made in the image and likeness of God. Is human, has the same aspirations, things of that sort, without regard to skin color. And at the same time, we have to realize that we live in a history and the narrative and a context that actually has made skin color profoundly important in how the law has treated various persons. Even at certain points in our history, how we even defined a citizen with regard to skin color and things of that sort. And even where we've had race-neutral policies, that doesn't mean all the effects have been random or without bias. So even as we are affirming the basic humanity, imago Dei creation of people, we actually also have to interrogate the history that we have lived and inherited, and to think carefully about unintended consequences, intended consequences, and how those things vary along racial and ethnic lines, and sometimes bring responses that are tailored to those disparities in order to make even deeper progress toward being the kind of human family that I think the Bible depicts, and seeing the kind of flourishing that we want for all the people that God has made.
Amen. We amening up here, as you can see, and we'll be collecting an offering after but such an important conversation, and it's multifaceted, it's complex. I would encourage you to look into the resources that Prison Fellowship, Right on Crime, the ERLC has produced, Pastor T's series of sermons even that dovetail with the conversation we've been having. Can you join me in thanking our panel for the conversation?
Thanks for listening to the ERLC podcast. You can find more information about criminal justice reform at ERLC.com. And join us next week as we listen to a conversation about adoption and the heart of God.